A Slayer can't seek his doom if he's in your pile of shame. This video will teach you how to get the best out of your contrast paints so you can get your dwarves on the battlefield faster than ever while still looking great. Notice the variation in the undercoat of this dwarf. Without zenithal coating, contrast paints are never going to look good. I use Chaos Black, then Gray Seer, and then Wraithbone. And then now I'm going to take a dry brush of any pure white I have all over the miniature. If you don't know what I mean by zenithal coating, definitely look it up. It's going to take your contrast paints to the next level. This is a pretty heavy dry brush. I want this dwarf to be somewhat brighter. If you want a more grim dark look, you want this last undercoating of white to be a lot lighter than what I'm doing here. Given the nature of contrast paints, it's important to plan out how you want to paint the miniature. I like to work from the inside out of my miniature, so I'm going to start with a base with a Basilicanum Gray. I think that's how you pronounce that. Watch my brush strokes. Working with contrast, we don't want unsightly lines or the coffee stain effect. I always pull, I never push the brush, and once an area is dry, it's done. Leave it alone. Don't go back over it again. Because at that point, you can only make it worse. Moving along. Still working from the inside out. Now we're going to do the shaft of his weapon. I'm using Skeleton Horde here. This will give us a nice light color on the wood. You can use darker, of course. If you use something like Citadel's Wormwood, I would suggest cutting it 50-50 as that color is awfully dark. If you're doing a whole unit, by all means use all types of shades for wood. Add some variation, make things stand out. Next up is the skin, which is incredibly easy to mess up with contrast paint. To prevent the coffee stain effects, we're going to break this miniature up into manageable chunks. Little bits at a time, starting with the foot and moving on. For this dwarf, I am using a 50-50 mix of Guilliman flesh and contrast medium to get a lighter shade than what would come out of the pot. Somewhat careful here not to touch the non-flesh areas, but if you get it on his jewelry or on his clothes, it's okay. You can go over it again with a little bit of Wraithbone or Gray Seer and move forward. Just if you get it clean the first time, just saves you a little bit of cleanup. Be extra careful about pulling with the flesh. We want it darker in the crevices of his gigantic muscles, and we want it much lighter on top of them. Inside out. Next step is to do his pants. I'm using just a little bit of blue here. This is a great opportunity to get in some faction colors so you can tie your slayers to the rest of your army. We're being very careful, very methodical. We don't want to get the blue onto his flesh, and we want to make sure we get every inch covered. After it dries, if we have to go back in and touch up the white, it can be done, but it's a lot trickier. Better to get it all fresh with one even coat. strokes here. Everything's going one direction. All the paint is being pulled to one direction, leaving the cloth or leather to look very consistent all the way across. Next is the belt, which I'm doing in snakebite leather. I love how this color looks, but it is one of the most temperamental of GW's contrast paints. It is very prone to the coffee stain effect. So just be very careful, very precise. Always pull the brush, never push. Make each stroke count. The Doom Dwarf is really starting to come together. We're just going to start hitting some of these smaller areas. Everywhere I see fur, I'm going to use Gore Grunt of Fur to cover over them. It's kind of a reddish brown. Just be very, very careful, very precise. We don't want to ruin what we've already done. Now for the funnest part of painting a Slayer, the awesome hair dyed bright orange. Here we're using Gryph-hound Orange, another Citadel paint. Notice here how I turned the miniature upside down, and I'm starting from the base of a skull and I'm going up. This is to get the paint to pull where I want to pull, to be darker at the base and lighter at the top. Same strategy in color for the beard. We're just using a smaller brush so we get more precise, making sure the orange only pulls in the deeper recesses and keeping a nice, consistent, even layer down the braids. Stay with me, we just need to get some of the details on this guy now. I'm using some Apothecary White to get the wrap around the top part of his shaft on his axe now. If you got any of the skeleton horde or flesh toned on that white, you definitely need to clean it up first before doing this, or it is going to look terrible. No self-respecting Slayer charges to his death without his drip. So now I am painting his jewelry using the gray contrast for the stone and then gold and silvers for the other pieces of metal. Take your time here. If you mess up and get it on the flesh, it is a pain to make it blend in when you do your touch-ups. Since I'm getting the metallics out anyways, I might as well start doing the blade of the weapon. Here I am using plate armor by Two Thin Coats. It's a relatively new brand, but I really like their metallics. Here I am using Hoplite Gold on the decorative edge of his blade. This is a new speed paint from Army Painter. Just the properties of metallics. I don't understand how they make contrast work, and honestly most of the stuff in the set are pretty terrible, but Hoplite Gold is really good. I recommend you get it if you're doing a lot of gold detailing for your rank and file troops in the old world. It's going to look great and speed up the process a lot. level up from your first one, and I'm just going to do the bladed part of his axe. Now we're using a bit of Balthasar gold for his bracelets and his very manly and not weird at all anklets. Do not use the hoplite gold for this. That stuff is really only good for varied surfaces. It looks terrible on anything that's flat. We're going to use the same gold on a couple of his beard jewelry pieces here. And now just some bright silver for his last piece of beard jewelry. Honestly, you could stop right here. If you're just looking to get this army to the tabletop, this is going to look great. It's going to look amazing if you get a whole unit of them. Everyone's going to be happy to see this army across from them. But if you want to take it up another notch, stay with me. I'm going to show you how to bring out this Slayer even more. The only liquid better than known oil is whiskey. This stuff is basically talent in the bottle. And here I am just going to apply it very selectively to the edges to where I want it to be a little darker, to where you think the colors need to blend a little bit more between the contrast paints. It's just going to help the unit look more cohesive, and it's going to instantly add skill as a painter. There's a reason they call it skill in a bottle. Now I'm going to take some Kislev flesh and a really small brush and just really try to hit some of these more natural highlights. Just add a little more depth to his skin. If you didn't use Kislev or Guilliman flesh for this, and you want to blend, you could also take Kislev flesh and mix it with the original flesh speed paint you used, and that will keep the tones close together and help make this last highlight really blend in on the model. You'll have to pardon my shooting. Sometimes it's hard to get these really fine details on the model and keep the model centered on the camera. But here I am just touching his eyebrows, his nose, anywhere that's really raised. We'll get a couple muscles, the veins in his hands, his feet. It's just going to add a little life to the model. Now we're going to take our brightest steel color and we're going to hit the edge of the blade and highlights on the silver jewelry. And this is going to make the blade look sharp. gold, something like that. Anyways, you really just need a brighter gold than what you had in your Balthazar gold. And we are going to hit both his beard jewelry and give a little bit of a highlight to his anklet and bracelets. We want to try to hit where we think the light would hit, so it looks like it's, you know, sparkling. So here I'm highlighting the Gorgruntifer. The interesting thing about this is I didn't have a color on hand that I really trusted to be a part of the Gorgruntifer. And what you do in this case is you take just a little bit of white and the contrast paints you want to highlight and mix them together and highlight it that way. And that way the colors are close enough to make a good highlight. It's not too abrupt. It looks more natural. Back to the punk rock hairdo, we're just going to dry brush a little bit of Fyreslayers orange just to the upper parts of his mohawk. Then we're going to do the same thing, just lighter and higher with Fire Dragon Bright to complete the Anarchist hairdo. Sticking with the Fire Dragon Bright, we're just going to pick out a few spots on his beard and add some highlights of those, add a little depth, add a little more warmth and color to it. That's really it. That's the last thing I do to this model. If you made it this far, thanks for sticking around. I hope I helped you make a Slayer that looks great in your display cabinet, and I hope they find their doom on the tabletop.